And actually, I'm lucky to be here at all because when I was leaving my office in the European Parliament on Thursday morning, I was mugged on my way to the airport. Somebody pulled a knife on me and said, "Give me your money." And I thought, okay, I'll try and bluff this out. I drew myself up very tall and I said, "You are making a terrible mistake. I am a member of the European Parliament." He said, "All right, then give me my money." So it's nice to be here at all, and it's especially nice to be here as a re-elected MEP. Our election was about 3 weeks ago, and during the night of the count, things looked to be going very badly for me because I could see where all the ballot papers were piling up, and voters had been scrawling next to my name, "Shove off back to Brussels." Actually, they'd been using a stronger word than shove. And I thought, that's it, it's over. But I'd reckoned without the ingenuity of my party's election agent, who gathered up a great kind of double armful of these ballot papers, went over to the returning officer and said, "Look, it is plainly the intention of all of these voters to return Daniel Hannan to Brussels, and therefore all these should be counted as ballots in the Conservative interest, and thus it is that I come to be standing before you tonight as a newly re-elected member of the European Parliament." But, you know, it's an interesting thing. The turnout at that election was another record low. It's happened every time we've had elections for the European Parliament. Fewer people have participated than at the previous one. And I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that people in Europe were more interested in your presidential contest last November than in any contemporary polls in Europe. To be honest, I'm not sure even my mother was staying awake to watch whether I was being re-elected, but 40 million people around the world, 40 million people, tuned in to watch your president's inauguration speech. Now, I'm guessing that he may not have had a huge majority in this audience. But nonetheless, what a testament, and you can take this, we can all be blasé about these things, what a testament to people's faith in the capacity of the American system and in the ability of your democracy to deliver change through the ballot box. Like I say, that may sound banal to you, that may sound platitudinous, but we can all take for granted the things that we've grown up with. And your democracy has been enormously fortunate. Your country, I think, was enormously fortunate in when it was founded. Your constitution was written at the moment when the idea of personal freedom and limited government and the rights of man had reached its fullest flower in the development of Western political thought. Your founders were men of matchless vision and patriotism. They knew at first hand, because they'd fought against it, where the concentration of power could lead. And so they designed a system which was to develop along what we might loosely call Jeffersonian principles, by which I mean the idea that decisions should be taken as closely as possible to the people that they affect, and that decision makers should be directly elected where possible. And that has given your system a series of unique attributes, and living here, particularly here in this state where there is such an emphasis on popular initiative and citizens' participation, you may not realize how unusual that makes you even among the so-called democracies of the world. Open primaries, citizens' ballots, recall mechanisms, the election of everyone from the school board to the sheriff. These things are very unusual, very peculiar to the US way of doing things. If you think I'm exaggerating, let me present a rather shameful piece of evidence. We've had some referendums in Europe. They're unusual, but they do happen. We had 3 referendums on whether we wanted to adopt the European Constitution. There was one in France, one in the Netherlands, and then one in Ireland. All 3 of them resulted in no votes. 54% of French, 62% of Dutch, and 53% of Irish voters said no. And what was the response in Brussels? To brush aside the results and carry on anyway. The European Constitution is being implemented in defiance of the people's verdict. I'm reminded of those eerie words of Bertolt Brecht Wouldn't it therefore be easier to dissolve the people and elect another in their place? And the truth is, all organizations, all unions, all polities tend to develop according to the DNA that was encoded at the moment of their conception. So, as I said, because the US was born out of a popular revolt against a remote autocracy, it tended to value the dispersal of power. Unfortunately, the European Union is no less a child of its time. Its founders were haunted by the memory of the Second World War and the plebiscitary democracy that had preceded it. And a lot of them had drawn the conclusion that democracy is not an antidote to authoritarianism, but rather its prelude. They were convinced from their recent history that untrammeled democracy would lead to people falling for shameless demagogues and would create the conditions for fascism and war. And that is why they created a system that vested supreme power in the hands of a group of unelected technocrats who were invulnerable to public opinion. It may astonish you to learn this, but in the European Union, the only body that is allowed to propose legislation is the European Commission, whom nobody votes for. Right? So a monopoly on legislative initiative is held by 27 appointed officials who then preside over a much larger bureaucracy. And the role of the elected people like me is to amend or delay or occasionally block. But we can't actually propose any laws. If you want to understand the difference between the American and European unions, you could do worse than look at the two constitutions. Your constitution, in my version, is 11 pages long. The EU's draft constitution is 526 pages long. Your constitution is chiefly concerned with the freedoms of the individual. The European constitution is mainly about the powers of the state. Yours limits itself to broad principles, such as where to draw the balance between state and federal authority. The EU's busies itself with such minutiae as the rights of disabled people, the status of asylum seekers. Your Declaration of Independence promises us life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The EU's constitution guarantees our right to strike action, free healthcare, and affordable housing. Indeed, it's all there in the opening words, and here is the attitudinal difference in the very first line. Yours begins, "We the people," and the Treaty of Rome, the foundational treaty of the European Union, begins, "His Majesty the King of the Belgians." And there, I think, is everything you need to know about the two systems. Now, why do I come here and tell you this? Why do I, as a British politician, come to Colorado to talk about these things? I'll tell you why. It's because I think that the genius of your constitution came originally from a tradition of political thought that once flourished in my country, but that has now been lost. And this may sound a strange thing for me to be saying to an American audience, but disregard what we've read about the American Revolution, because on both sides of the Atlantic, subsequent generations of historians tended to present it as a national rising, as indeed a war of independence.